Hey everyone, Reed here with Big Strong Book, author of Course of 1,000, now available on Amazon. And today this is awkward because there's no dust jacket, but today we're talking about William Faulkner's If I Forget the Jerusalem, and otherwise known as the Wild Palms. I'll get into that here in a little bit. This is the seventh novel that I have read by Faulkner, preceded by As I Lay Dying, The Sound and the Fury, Light in August, Absalom, Absalom, Go Down Moses, and The Unvanquished. So those were the six that I had read prior to this one. And If I Forget the Jerusalem is quite the interesting book. It is at one point, in one hand, similar to things like Go Down Moses and The Unvanquished, novels that are composed of shorter tales. I mean, Go Down Moses and The Unvanquished, it is crystal clear. A lot of them were previously published short stories that then were reworked into being chapters in a greater work in the novel. Uh, and Jerusalem is different than that, but still similar in some ways. And I think even just the onset of how this book is structured, what the two components of it make it inherently difficult to really, I think, appreciate what this work is capable of, at least on a first read. So I'll get into that here. So If I Forget the Jerusalem was Faulkner's originally intended title. When it was first published in 37 or 38, it was called The Wild Palms, which is the name of one of the stories. So this novel, it is a novel and it isn't at the same time. This is two tales, Wild Palms and Old Man, two different tales into different time periods. They're about 10 years apart, concerning different casts of characters, different circumstances. The way that they're linked is some broad thematic links, some parallels, juxtapositions, contradictions. And it isn't you get one tale and then the other, they alternate. They alternate in chapters. So you get a chapter of Wild Palms and a chapter of Old Man, and it goes back and forth for the whole book. And then it begins with Wild Palms, then it ultimately, of course, ends with Old Man. It does not end on Wild Palms. And because these stories never intersect, there isn't like they're distant, they're divided by time, by region, by characters, but then all of a sudden these stories are going to converge, and then you're going to be like, oh, that's how they fit together. No, there's not really that. It's just the broad similarities between the main plot threads of the stories, and then the thematic concerns therein. Now, I say that, but of course, Faulkner, in his Faulknerianness, doesn't give over so easily to the reader, certainly not on a first read. It's one thing I love about Faulkner. You read through one of his novels, one of his works, and it's like peeling an apple. But yet, on a first read, what you're getting is the peel itself and a glimpse of the fruit within. And you see the fruit, you enjoy the idea of the fruit. You might get a little taste of it too within the peel, within the surface level, but you just can't penetrate further into what these stories are about until you read it many, many times. And this is good because it has been about a year since I read Faulkner. So it's a good reminder to myself, I guess, too, that when I read a Faulkner novel, particularly one, certainly by the late 30s, he had developed his style. his predilections, what he was concerned about, what he wanted, the kind of stories he wanted to tell. He was very confident in that. Really, I mean, really was hitting his stride in many respects, and one could argue he maybe, once the 30s kicked in, I mean, he had the Sound and the Fury, and that's what kind of like that was the impetus for his explosion into the 30s, which also coincided with his work in Hollywood too, interestingly enough. Um, and he he doesn't, he doesn't give anything to the reader, but there's just such a darkness portrayed within the words of Faulkner, a darkness, a truth, a laid bare reality in that is both, it's part stream of consciousness, it's part um, almost maximalist in its. I know it's not. Faulkner isn't really technically maximalist, but he's maximalist, at least in my mind, in terms of just the in terms of how he primarily in terms of how he employs the use of stream of consciousness. He just goes all in, just really digs his nails into these characters' minds and their 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 desires, their lusts, their apprehensions, their just terrible proclivities. What makes them who they are, and kind of what is the tragedy at the center of them. And he paints such a rich canvas, and he can do that with just a few characters in a mundane setting, a mundane environment, a repetitive environment, even as we see in this. And it's so, you're overwhelmed by it. I think of things like Absalom, and I know we're getting further away from this book, but um I think of things like Absalom, Sound and the Fury when he's at his best, even though this is, if I forget, the Jerusalem is much different than that. But you're overwhelmed and you're in awe at the same time. It's this great, just, oh, but you love it. Um, yeah, you love it all the way. So, getting into the novel itself, 7.5 minutes into this review, Wild Palms primarily concerns a doctor dropout. Not really a doctor; it's a little up in the air. He was an intern at one point. A man named Wayne. I'm forgetting his name. Wayne Wayneborn Wilburn, and he's almost like this sad sap of a man. He doesn't he doesn't know what he wants in life. He's kind of in that weird span, and he thinks it is necessary for him to gain a partner. And so he eventually starts an affair with this woman named Charlotte, whose husband who is referred to as the Rat, or Rittenmeyer's his name. Uh, he is a very cold and distant, and uh, abuse might be implied. I forget off the top of my head, or maybe it's not, and that was just me reading into it too much. Um, but he's kind of just this bastard of a husband, and but he's a husband that he willingly just kind of. I mean, Charlotte at one point in the story says to Wilborn, he's Catholic, so he's not going to give me a divorce, but he'll let me kind of go my own way if I want to. He respects that about me. So she and Wilburn, with kind of, they're always laying the tracks directly in front of like the crazy train that is their relationship, pretty much. They have very little, not a lot of money, not a lot of food, and as they go into they spend some time in Chicago, and he just kind of bums around, and he's trying to get jobs in the medical profession, and she starts kind of creating, and I think painting these miniatures. And there's this great, I forget which chapter or which section it is of the story, but it's just this constant, this overbearing. They're surrounded by all these miniatures in their apartment, and then it culminates in this. They have a friend called McCord who kind of hooks them up with job stuff and with some money, and there's just kind of this desperate conversation that Wilborn has with him, which is just, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. And he starts uh, extemporizing in language that is unbecoming of the character that has been set up. And it's done to humorous effect almost. It's almost darkly humorous. There's this man that's at the end of, he's like almost at the verge of a bender. Not quite there, but he's certainly at the end of the rope of sanity, of reason, of clarity, of peace of mind. And it's kind of like the end. If any of you have read Cormac McCarthy's Cities of the Plain, at the end of that book, there's like this whole, it just kind of like these big monologues of philosophy and regret and things like that. That's what's present in here, and it's played to humorous effect because McCord's like, dude, I don't know what the hell, I can't understand what the hell you're saying. Again, played to humorous effect, but it is eventually made clear that Wilborn is or has some experience as an abortionist. Uh, I mean, he at least says he knows how to do it and do it well, and of course that will then tie into the fraught relationship that he has with Charlotte. His is the story, and his is the thought viewpoint, where the iconic sentence from this book, if it's between, I'll get to it here because it's at the kind of the way end of his story. Between grief and nothing, I will take grief, which I'm sure all of you have heard that line before, but that's just, I mean, it's the summation of that story. So that's kind of what we're going with here. Between grief and nothing, I will take grief. As he's, at a place where he's just kind of almost recounting his life to himself. Contrast that with this other story. So Old Man. It concerns the I think the Mississippi Delta flood of 1927, 1928. And it concerns some, initially a group, but then it centers around one in particular of convicts as they're being transported kind of through this flood. They've got, the folks of the Delta and the convicts as well in the prison. They have to evacuate. And there comes a point where there's just kind of this absurd interaction where they get to kind of a holding place, and like a guard or whether it might be a sheriff too, or a sheriff's deputy, asks the convicts, can you row a boat? Can you swim? And that we've got like people out there, and asking the convicts, I mean, perhaps they shouldn't do that, but they're thinking, well, if they drown out there, then no harm done. But there's this convict that goes out. He goes out on this boat, and he rescues this pregnant woman, and then so much of this story then is dominated by at least him at the end, chronologically recounting to convicts of what happened to him, what transpired. And it's this strange and just whirlwind and tornado of a feat of man against nature, but simultaneously it's man against himself, because he's constantly in pain doing this, but he never at one point he just says, screw it, I'm just going to leave the boat, I'm going to get to land, I'm going to leave the boat, I'm going to leave the woman, I'm just going to leave it all, and I'm not, like, I'm just going to make a run for it, because he arguably can, but he doesn't. Whether it's, he feels that there will be a reward for doing that. He feels like he will be rewarded, or something of that nature. But they come across these interesting characters on a steamboat, and then they're with this Cajun guy who can only say like boom when he shoots a gun, and it's these constant. I mean, again, I compare it to McCarthy because I'm more familiar with McCarthy than I am with Faulkner, and yet probably those nuances and those quirks, whatever you want to call them, of McCarthy, he owes in large part to Faulkner. So as he's going through the Delta and he's trying to figure out if he's on a river, what river is he on? Where is he? He's I mean, he's kind of losing his own. I don't want to say he's losing his own mind and sense of self, but as he becomes so lost on this river and he doesn't know where he is or practically why he is. Um, and then you have to think of this as like almost a framing narrative of him telling this to his convicts after ostensibly he's been recaptured or has turned himself in, and it's whether it's this duty, it's just this strange type of just propulsion, what guides him, what moves him, and it's the same in a strange code of honor, or whatever you want to call that is, or a tragic honor perhaps, that is then also, I mean, that is the same with Wilborn, kind of as he is um trying to provide. He's like, I don't even know why I'm in this relationship, I'm moving. So there are similarities of kind of man at the end of the rope, whether ostensibly a free man, in the case of Wilborn for most of his story, and then the convict, the convicted man, but yet they are the same, or they, their journeys are fraught, but yet they move through um, a way of acting that they perhaps shouldn't do. It's not in their best self interests, but yet they continue to do these things, whether it's not necessarily even for the good of the others, as it turns, like as particularly with Wilburn's story with with Wild Palms, and so it's that kind of like puzzling quality that these stories leave you with, that is both, it's fascinating, it's frustrating at the same time, and again, I know I've barely scratched the surface with these, um, and yeah, I barely scratched the surface with them. Um, but that's the joy with reading Faulkner, at least for me. I can see how so many people will read Faulkner's books and it'll be a complete turn off and they'll never want to read anything he's written because it is nonstop. Just things are getting thrown at you and you just have to like take the moment to kind of just sit back, calm yourself down, and be like, just take it one word at a time. That's tough, and I have to remind myself to keep doing that. That it's not necessarily a race to kind of get to the end, which is somehow or sometimes how I read. But it's just, you know, strength in moving slowly, even though one could argue even if you do move slowly, you might not even really get that far to begin with, but whatever. So, yeah, if I forget the Jerusalem, it's very solid. Just as anything that Faulkner has written, it's just absolutely solid. It's there. It's clear. It's clear in terms of just the power that it holds, and it's just the richness of the prose, which is something that, you know, hopefully one day I'll be able to better dive in and articulate that with Faulkner. Um, but all of Faulkner's strengths are at play here. It's just the difficulty with how this is structured, with the alternating back and forth, and really tying it in. And I don't know if these would have been stronger as just two novellas. Does it elevate them? It certainly makes you think, which maybe that's what Faulkner was going for all along, is just to try to make you think, why the hell are these tales, these two stories so tied together? Yeah, it's quite interesting. So if I forget the Jerusalem, I mean, I would definitely recommend it for anybody who has a handful of Faulkners under their belt. And yeah, I'm looking forward in the near future here to diving into more of Uncle Bill. So if I forget the Jerusalem, if you have read it, let me know what you think. And as always, I will see you guys next time.